All right, so today we are talking about a new political party. We've known for a while about the Democrats and the Republicans and how they kind of emerged, but today we're taking a look at a brand new one, and this is called the Populist Party. What we're going to see is that the Populist Party grows in response to a number of different things, but it really is in response to very, very high debts from agricultural families. High debts, low prices for their goods, and very high unemployment rates. And so this is something that they call it the People's Party or the Populist Party, and it grows out of uh, just kind of a common man's movement, considered to be very much about the common man and the basic needs of normal people. What we're going to see is that it appeals very much to the farming class, to the agriculturalist. That would be farm owners, small landowners, farm hands, other low class workers, such as maybe miners, and in some cases, even industrial factory workers. So we see that it has, in some cases, broader appeal, but more often than not, it's really about the farming class. Now, it does have pretty significant support, particularly in, as we can see, the South and the West, largely because those are very agricultural areas of the country. There's a lot of agriculture in places like Pennsylvania and New York and New Jersey as well, and Ohio, but those places are also beginning to industrialize much more. And so the focus of political attention in those places is moving to the urban areas, to the cities. But in Tennessee and Missouri and Nebraska and all of these areas in the South and West, they're still very much dominated by agricultural work. And so the party really kind of gets a strong hold in many of those places. Now, what we're going to see is that this is a party that, because it's for the common man, because it's for the farmers, it's really very opposed and very wary of things like banks and large business, industrial companies, railroads, monopolies, those sorts of things. Things that would be much more common in the large cities. So it really kind of becomes almost an urban versus rural situation, a big business, big enterprise, big money versus the little guy scenario as well. So let's take a look really quickly here at the platform. What do the Populist Party of that time period, what do they want? What is it that they really believe? We know who they dislike. We know what they oppose. Now let's take a look at what they like. First, they really like the adoption of what's called the Australian ballot, or what we might call the secret ballot. Back then, it was a matter of public record, and so they wanted to make sure that it becomes secret. They also were in favor of what they called the direct election of U.S. senators. Now, we got to take a time out here because we have the direct election of U.S. senators, but that wasn't always the case. The way the Constitution originally reads is that the people, right? The people of an area are going to vote to elect its House of Representatives members, its congressmen. But the governor of the state is going to appoint its two senators. One was the people's house, and then you had the upper house, that was the Senate. Well, they believed that anybody that represents their state on a national level should be put there by the people. So they wanted the direct election of U.S. senators. In addition to that, they were very much for banking reform. That makes perfect sense for a company that doesn't like big banks, that doesn't like big business. They want to reform it. It also makes perfect sense for a large group of farmers that are being crushed by debt and terrible lending policies. So they want to see reform going on with the banks. They're also pushing very hard for what is called a graduated income tax. Now, graduated income tax very simply means that the more you make, the more you pay. So people who make very little would pay very little in terms of a percentage of what they make to the US government in taxes. But if you are one of the big fat cats of Wall Street, if you are the CEO, if you're a very wealthy, self-made person, then you can afford to pay more. So you're going to pay a higher percentage. It's graduated with your level of success. So, for example, let's say that the lowest in society might pay 1%. And the very top of society might pay 10%, and everybody else in the middle would pay somewhere on that scale. That would be a graduated income tax, and that's what they really begin to push for. Now, So far, so good. We understand that. In fact, I'm going to go back here. We have now the secret ballot. We have the U.S. Direct election of U.S. senators. We have periodically throughout our history done some banking reform, and we certainly now have a graduated income tax. Always a source of contention. What else do they want? By the way, those are normal things. Now they get fought over and talked about, well, how much is appropriate for a graduated income tax. I'm going to let others fight that out, and you can talk about that in comments or whatnot. But the reality is, we have those things, and they still get argued over today. However, things take kind of an interesting turn here because the populists really believe that the federal government should own and operate all of the railroads. Now, the railroads are private business, private industries. They were invested in, they were publicly held. And so to suggest that the government should own and operate, should basically seize this private industry, is really in many ways shades of socialism. That the government should be the employer, that they should take over these things that private business built. It got so large that, again, the populists were really worried about its power and the intrusion that they had over the life of farmers. After all, if you're a farmer, you have to pay these railway companies to transport your produce or your grains or whatever the case may be to the larger markets to be sold. And so they thought they would get a better deal, a more fair deal, if the government owned those things. For many people, that was a step too far. That was something that certainly was more radical. So while they maybe made good points, while they maybe had some influence with some of these other ideas, that one kind of got them branded in some ways as radical reformers. And in some ways, they were. What we're going to see next is, and this is maybe the most important of the things that they pushed, was called the free and unlimited coinage of silver. Back then, the dollar was tied to gold and gold only. They wanted to see silver become a new standard for which currency could be circulated. What that would do is it would increase the amount of banknotes in circulation, increase the money supply. However, what it would also do is it would create some pretty significant inflation. Now, they wanted to do that because the inflation wouldn't hurt them. It would hurt the banks. It would hurt the lenders, the people that they viewed as kind of the enemy. What it would do for them is it would put more money in the hands of the lower class and allow them to do things like pay off the debt that they're in. And so while it might be good for some segments of society, it really would be very harmful for others. And so you can have the debate about, well, what's government's role? Should the government pick winners and losers? Because banks and big industry employ a lot of people and they play an important role in our economy, but so do farmers. So how do we strike that balance? And is it fair to choose one over the other in a capitalist system, in a free market? So that was the bulk. Now, there were others as well, but that's the bulk of their platform, the big ideas. Now I want to introduce you to kind of their de facto leader. This is a guy by the name of William Jennings Bryan. And he's a very influential American, one that is not a founding father or the likes, but probably deserves more recognition than he gets. What we're going to see is that he was a populist congressman from Nebraska. He was also an incredibly powerful speaker. He was an orator that we haven't seen the likes of in many, many years. And so he gets himself elected and becomes very popular within this populist party. He has kind of outsider ideas. In fact, he is going to kind of bring the populist party mainstream with this speech that he gives called the Cross of Gold speech. He says very famously of the government, "You shall not crucify mankind on a cross of gold." And he kind of evokes religious symbolism there, that the cross of gold or the gold standard is really just destroying the basic fabric of society, particularly as it pertains to the common man. And so he was really pushing for that unlimited coinage of silver. Now, he is going to become called what's kind of a popocrat. Now, yes, he's a populist, but they call him a popocrat because he actually merges the two parties. He was very popular as the leader of the populist, but he becomes kind of courted by the Democratic Party. He runs for president in 1896 as a Democrat. And so in doing so, he kind of brings the Democrats and the populists together, hence the Popocrat name. It really does, in many ways, merge those two parties. He is defeated ultimately by William McKinley, who becomes president, and populism kind of fades away for a time. Now, what we'll see is that, like many things, there are waves. Populism rises and it grows, and then it declines. It never looks the same way twice. What the populists wanted at that time is dramatically different than what maybe modern day people who are labeled modern day populists would desire. But right now, we are experiencing more populist movements. All that really means is that there's kind of an outside the mainstream of the two-party system. There's an uprising, a wave of people who are considering themselves common people that are interested in some change that's not being addressed by the two major parties. On the right, populism are going to be supporters of people like Donald Trump. The Republican Party maybe doesn't fully get or understand or support Donald Trump. On the left, a populism uprising might be this sudden surge of support for people like Bernie Sanders, who may not represent the most or many of the mainstream Democrats. And so we see those things periodically throughout our history. This isn't the first time, and it won't be the last. One important question that I want to ask everybody, though, is kind of who swallows who. These parties are merged, and today we have a Democratic Party, but not a populist party the way that we did back then. So this is a very important political cartoon. You see the Democratic symbol of the donkey being kind of swallowed up by a snake that's labeled Populist Party. And the head of the snake is a caricature, very easily recognizable as William Jennings Bryan. Now, the Populist Party does not exist, or does it? Right? Some would argue that the Populist Party really kind of swallows up the Democratic Party, and that all that exists of the Democratic Party today is the name, that they really were fundamentally transformed into populist because so many of the things that the populists push for, the Democrats adopted and were kind of forced into doing so. Others would say, well, no, the Democratic Party adopted the populists, kind of absorbed them, and then they kind of merged as one. So the Democratic Party ceased to exist, but many of their ideas are continuing on. I don't know which is true. I don't know if the Democratic Party kind of absorbed and killed the Populist Party, or if the Populist Party kind of swallowed up the Democratic Party and only, the only thing remnants of it are its name. But anyway, that is the Populist Party in a nutshell. I hope you understand. I hope you learned a little bit something. Feel free to leave me any comments below. Make sure that you subscribe and continue to follow with some of our upcoming videos. Thanks for watching, guys.